Hello. About 11 years ago, we had moved into a home, and after moving in all day, we were getting ready to go to bed. My wife and I had settled down, and I'm watching a little TV before I go to bed. And in the stillness of the night, as I'm sitting there by myself, my wife is now dozed off. I hear a slight noise, and it sounds like chewing. And I turn my head and I look on the nightstand off on my left-hand side, and lo and behold, there's this little mouse sitting on my nightstand, chewing on a kernel of popcorn. I couldn't believe it. Uh, so as I'm trying to watch a show, what disturbed me was a mouse chewing a piece of popcorn. Needless to say, the rest of the night we were trying to chase down that mouse, which eventually we got, and we took care of it. But I was so surprised as I look back that there's a mouse chewing on a piece of popcorn in the middle of the night as I'm watching TV, and I could hear that. It's always surprising those different things that you and I can hear. As I've been here at First Baptist Church in Filer, I've had the privilege and opportunity to be involved in a lot of different services. One of the harder services to be involved with are obviously funeral services. There will be one funeral service that always stands out in my mind, and that was one involving a gentleman by the name of Jim Jarvis. And I still have the information from him. He passed away on April 26th of 2012. But what always will stay in my mind about Jim was he found out he had cancer, didn't want to fight it anymore. And about a week after I had met with him about his first diagnosis of cancer, he had looked at me and said, "You know, Andy, I finally have heard God speaking to me, and I really want to give my life to him. Even though I have just a few months to live, I'm willing to give my life to God at this point because I know he's got a job for me." Jim Jarvis heard God's voice in the stillness of his nights when things were really hard. He was listening for God. That brings to my mind some real biblical truth, and that is Samuel, when he heard his voice and God was calling him, Samuel heard God's voice. Elijah, when he's hiding out in the mountain, he saw an earthquake. We just had an earthquake. He saw a fire. We've seen fires. He saw wind. We've seen wind. But when he heard God's voice, he knew unmistakably that it was God's voice. Jesus Christ, when he had to get alone after the feast in the upper room and went to the Garden of Gethsemane, he had to hear God's voice, and he heard it. So the thought I come back to is, with all the chaos that's going on in our world now, we've been given stay-at-home orders, we've been told to quarantine, we've been told to stay inside, and everything is a little bit more quiet than what it was before. So let me ask you, as things are quiet and different than the regular routine, do you hear God's voice? What is he saying to you? What do you say to him? What kind of relationship do you have with the Lord in a time when all the busyness of life fades to the background? The Apostle Paul said it this way. The book of Philippians chapter 4, verse number 6 and 7, he said this. He said, "Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." And I cannot help but think there's a clue throughout the Bible, throughout life's experiences, that when things are quiet, we have a tendency to hear things that usually we do not give much credit towards otherwise. So let me challenge you in the change of routine, in the stillness of the night. Do you hear God's voice? Are you looking to hear God's voice? You'll be surprised at those times when you hear it when you least expect it, because God's there and God has a plan for you and I in the most difficult of times.